Welcome to the Private Lender Podcast with your hosts from Hard Money Bankers, Jason Balin and Chris Haddon. This podcast is sponsored by hardmoneymastermind.com.
Hey guys, thanks for checking out the show. Today we are covering construction management for private lenders. As people are probably aware, a big part of this industry is residential fix and flip type loans. It's not the only kind of loan we do. There are straight acquisition loans and cash out refinances and other stuff, but purchase and rehab is definitely a niche that private lenders cover in good detail. So we're going to let you know what we do internally at HMB to analyze construction projects up front, and then what we're doing along the way to ensure they get safely to completion and that our loan amount and draw amounts are all safe too.
Yeah, first things first, if there is a construction component in place, let's say it's a fix and flip property and they're buying it at a certain price and then they need to renovate it as a value add in order to sell based off an after repair value, a few things you need to make sure. Number one, you got to determine what that construction budget is, what's reasonable for that budget. And number two, is the borrower qualified to be able to execute on that particular project? Are they going to do the work themselves? Do they have a general contractor? Is it a big project? Is it a small project? So first, identifying the work that needs to be done. Highly recommend, if you're newer in the business, to go out to the property yourself. And if you don't have much experience with construction, maybe even take a home inspector or a contractor at the beginning and pay them a little bit of money just to travel with you, just to see what they would recommend the average budget would be, or what their quote or what their bid would be to renovate it to full after repair value. Now, the funky thing with renovating a house is all of us could renovate a house, but we'd all sell it at potentially different prices, right? One person might do a Mac Daddy renovation. One person might do like a lipstick on a pig project. Someone, might do high end, low end. Like, we have different tastes, right? Like, we saw a project once. I'll never forget that this guy did a great renovation. And then I noticed that he had like this ugly green, like army green front door and on this townhouse, and he wasn't getting any showings. Like, it was weird. Like, the pictures look really, really nice, but then people would in essence like show up there, like they wouldn't go in the house. They're like, this thing's crappy, I'm not going to go in there. So like all of that is important when you're renovating a property, and knowing that the borrower can execute on the renovation, because that's one of the hardest parts, I would say, related to it. Now, I'll tell you that in our experience, the biggest way to offset risk is to lend to good quality borrowers. When I say good quality borrower, a borrower that has good credit, a borrower that has cash, that has cash down payments and high reserves, potentially a borrower that has experience in renovating houses. But that alleviates a lot of the risk, because here's the thing. You could set up a renovation budget for $70,000 on a $70,000 budget, but that doesn't mean that it's going to only cost them $70,000. Everyone has cost overruns. Everyone has eventually has a contractor that steals from them. Everybody, thinks it's going to be a certain price, and then, they demo a wall and they have to reroute everything, or the local code says they have to put a sprinkler system in because it's built before a certain date, right? There's a lot of different unknowns that you can't control, but what you can control is making sure that the quality of borrower is good and top notch on the front end, knowing that not if, but when they go over budget, they'll be able to make it up, and they'll be able to make it up by allocating additional cash that they have.
Yeah, I mean, a couple important things that you mentioned there. Like, you can get an indication just by working with somebody up front, not 100% certainty, but a good indication of how someone's going to operate based on how they communicate with you, what their history is, what their financials look like. Because, just like the way people operate in life is very similar to how they're going to operate on a real estate project, right? So, keep that in mind when considering construction lending for people. Now, like Jay mentioned before, we used to go to every property, not only up front before we funded a loan, but we used to do our own construction inspections. And we did that for a few years, or maybe more than that, until we started hiring third-party inspectors to be running all over the DC metro area. So we wouldn't have to do it anymore. But there's a lot of value in doing that up front. And Jay, do you want to talk a little bit about how we do it now, how we, QC somebody's scope of work and like what happens up front and then along the way?
Yeah, absolutely. And real quick, related to underwriting a borrower, if a borrower has low credit and a high construction budget, the loan's going to default, right? If you can't manage your household expenses, you're not going to be able to manage a construction project. That's just what happens from our experience. Like, we're not making this up. That is what we've seen from experience. So you can learn that. So you can learn that the easy way or the hard way. So we have, this is the way our process works. So internally, we actually have a full-time inspector because we do enough loans that we can support that. But in some of our other offices, we have, outsourced inspectors, real estate agents, real estate investors, folks, contractors, folks that know property values and they know construction and stuff like that. And that's what's important. And, they're paid on a one-off basis to go out to the property and determine the numbers. So the way that it works internally is we have a form on our website. They fill out the form with everything that, when a construction, we only reimburse on completed work, right? So they start the work. Let's say the first draw is $10,000. They do demo and they replace the roof. They fill out a draw request online on our website. It immediately goes to our portfolio manager, Terry, which is like, kind of it can be a processor. It can go to you, go to whoever you want. That gets forwarded to whatever the inspector is going to be. And a few things, they forward the entire budget to them, or I'm sorry, they forward the entire draw request to them, but they also forward what the remaining balance and budget was on the project, right? So it's, hey, they're requesting 10 grand. The project was $50,000. We have $50,000 held. Right. So they know the whole scope, because obviously it's important to only reimburse on work that's completed, but you also need to understand that there always needs to be enough money in the escrow account to complete the work. Right. So someone could do $50,000 worth of work, but they only did equivalent to, 25% of the job. And you might only have, whatever, a certain amount of money in there, and then you won't have enough to complete it. So it's important to kind of micromanage that along the way. One of the things that we do to kind of QC that is, it goes to the inspector, right? They review it. They do the draw request. They go to the property. Typically, we strive to get everything done in 24 hours. If it takes 48 hours, that's fine, right? Because we want to get money back into the borrower's hands for cash management as quick as possible. So we'll get the whole thing set up. And then the way that we QC it internally, again, I would recommend you doing all these inspections yourself or meeting an inspector out there yourself. I think it's good for learning. I also think it's good for lead gen to try to get additional business from these borrowers and having good relationships with them. But eventually, if you don't do that and you're hiring somebody to do that, in essence, the report comes to you and you look at the pictures, get tons and tons of pictures. You get pictures, you cross-reference before and after and the budget, and then you can make an educated decision if you want to release those funds.
Yeah. And something else that we like to do internally is the inspector who does our upfront inspection and valuation is also the same inspector that's going to be doing draw inspections. So they're familiar with this project from beginning to end. Right.
That's right.
And that turns into some helpful feedback from us. Like, they know what the budget's going to be. They know what the after repair value is supposed to be. They know how this project is supposed to turn out. So having them as your eyes and ears on the street at the property is very, very beneficial.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, so that's kind of, that's how we do it. We hold all the construction funds in an escrow account, that we control, and then we reimburse it to the borrower in real time. Most of our borrowers are set up on ACH for payments. We pull payments for the first of the month, and on the other side, when they have a draw request, we send them via ACH the funds so they can go on the way. We send the money to them. We don't typically send it to the contractor. Sometimes we might do lien releases. I think that's a important component depending on, what state you're in. You might want to be able to do some sort of lien releases. So that's a factor as well. But, you kind of keep a good process. You want you want to provide good customer service to be able to do it quickly for them, right? Like you should prioritize them. I remember there was a lender locally that did a lot of deals and he said, yep, I only process draw requests on a Friday. Like that kind of pisses people off. Like if you have the ability and the time to do it as quick as possible, right? Because the last thing you want to do is not get the next deal that they have because the draws took too long. You don't want to be a bank. A bank takes a week or 2 weeks.
Yeah.
They don't have time for that. You got to do these as quick as possible, but you also got to be fair in your underwriting the draw request to make sure that they're not trying to take advantage of you, because the borrower typically will if they can, right? They want all the money right now,
Sure.
right? They'd rather have it in their account than your account. But that's common sense. So you got to be smart about it. And here's the thing, if they're over budget by a few $1,000s or whatever it is, like we typically don't want to micromanage them on their construction project. We just want to make sure that the work is reasonably getting done, right? Like we strive in doing good loans to good borrowers on the front end. They have high down payments. They have good credit. They have good cash reserves. That and we tell them this up front. It's part of our scripting process. Like, we're not going to micromanage you on the construction project. Just be reasonable and get the work completed quickly and, to a high degree, and we'll get it done, right? Like, we're not going to go in and let's say they request $11,000 and like $1,000 was for, I don't know, dishwasher that is on site but wasn't installed yet. We're not going to be like, yeah, we're going to hold that $1,000 back until that gets installed. Like, we're not doing that, right? Like, nobody has time for that, and nobody wants to do that. If you feel like you have to do that and wait because you're nervous that, well, what if they take their refrigerator and move it on to their next project, which they could do, right? They could also rip it out after the fact and take it on to the next project. Like, those are risks that come in, but you got to make sure you're writing loans to the right borrowers that have good characteristics. You have a good piece of collateral. They're bringing high down payments in to begin with, that they have a lot to lose on this project. And chances are you're not going to have those problems.
One other quick tip before we wrap up here is make it very, very, very clear that you're only giving draws on completed work, right? You would think that every real estate investor out there knows that, but you'd be surprised. People get to the table, a rehabber, even an experienced one, and they're like, okay, cool. I just closed. Can I have my first draw for $15,000 so I can go start the work? And so obviously that's in your documents and everything else, how it doesn't work like that. And it's only completed work. But I would just say, make it verbally, have a conversation and make it very, very clear that they're completing the work and then being reimbursed for what's done.
And interest.
What's that?
And paying interest on the gross amount.
Oh, yeah. And that's a good point too. Dutch versus non-Dutch interest. In our world, it is most common to be charging interest on the entire amount of the loan throughout the term of the loan, even though you haven't given all the draws out yet. I know in bank world, it's the opposite, where they're only charging interest on what has been dispersed. But private lenders with capital tied up, we really can't do that. It doesn't make any sense. So hope you guys enjoyed the show, and we will see you next time here on the Private Lenders Podcast.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast. Please note that the opinions stated by all the speakers on this show are only opinions and not intended for legal, financial, or accounting advice. Please make sure to always check with your own legal, accounting, and financial professionals. If you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast, we'd appreciate it if you would spread the word. Make sure to check out hardmoneymastermind.com, the #1 free community for new and experienced private and hard money lenders.